Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Grind, a podcast all about content creation. I'm going to be your host today, Alec Bobko, and joining me from Shared Screens is Jordan Deeb.
What's up?
And some other Josh.
Howdy.
And today we have a very special guest for you guys. We have one of the future class of video games, Zack Hartzman from Hey Listen Games. How you doing today, Zack?
I'm doing great. How's it going?
Doing well today.
Good.
Doing
Great.
well.
Oh yeah.
So, Zack, just to start off, if people don't know you, give us a little introduction about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I am a high school teacher at a public high school in the Bronx in New York City. More specifically, my school is a interesting one. While it's a public school, but it is also an international transfer school. So I teach a 100% immigrant and English as a new language population. And my students, because it's a transfer school, as long as they're under 21, they can come in and start high school over. So sometimes I have students who are standard high school age, but I've had students up to like 22, 23 years old. On the rare occasion, 24 one time in my class as a senior.
Because they can start as long as they're under 21, but if they turn 21, they continue?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So because in New York we have the English Regents exam, which students have to pass to graduate, and the nature of my students not knowing English when they move here, that's often a difficult thing for them to pass. So they come and start back in 9th grade, regardless of where they were in their home countries. So if they're 21 when they come, they go to 9th grade, go 4 years from there. Although I've never taught a 25-year-old myself. Usually by senior year, I have 21 is usually the age that I teach when they hit their 4th year school.
Gotcha.
And I've been doing that for a number of years now. And since the beginning of my career, I was always trying to find cool ways to bring in all the geek related stuff that I'm passionate about: movies, TV, comics. And a couple years, and whenever I did that, it was always super cool. It always went really great because students respond better when teachers are actually passionate about the things that they're bringing into the classroom. So like when I'm passionate about what I'm doing, it's like contagious, and then my students respond really well. And because of that, eventually I wanted to start bringing in video games, and I did, and it was even better than like bringing in comics and movies. And when I originally started that, there were no resources online about how to use video games in the classroom other than like educational video games, which is not what I do. I don't use Oregon Trail or Math Blaster, Reader Rabbit. That's not what I'm doing in my classroom. I'm using games that we play for fun and using those as like text, same way you would a book in your English language arts class or history class. But resources for that didn't exist because teachers weren't really doing it. So I started to make my own curriculum, my own lesson plans, my own handouts and everything. And in talking with people, I started to see that there was a big interest in doing this. So I launched Hey Listen Games, which is my website where I just make all of my curriculum available for free. I blog about my experiences teaching with games and provide full rationales for the different games I use in my classrooms. And it's been super well received. Like you mentioned, I was one of the inaugural members of the future class this past year, which was really cool. I was really like the only outsider from the gaming industry in that group. It was mostly people in the industry, and I was like the teacher who just kind of hopped into the group, so that was pretty cool. And then I recently just published a number of books about teaching with video games, which was a long, difficult process, but I'm happy that those are finally out.
Now, what subject do you actually teach?
So it changes year to year.
Okay.
I've taught ELA, I've taught Global 1, Global 2, US History, Economics and American Government. Currently, I'm teaching Economics and American Government, although next year I'll probably be teaching US History again. But I also teach an elective course specifically dedicated to video games as literature as well. That's my favorite one to talk about.
I could imagine.
When selecting a game to teach, what's the kind of criteria? Do you have any preset criteria on how to pick a game to use as literature? and teach it to a class?
Typically, the length is really the
Mhm.
only criteria I have. I can't use anything that's really longer than 4 or 5 hours at the maximum. I just don't
Right.
have the class time to do that. So
Mhm.
big on indie games. Indie games are great. Play indie games. They have
Right.
really great stories. It can teach a lot. So I've used some AAA games in some cases, but it was more like here's a snippet of the game that I can use for a hot second. But usually it's a shorter indie game like narrative experience.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, like I
How?
watched a little bit of this let's play you were doing of Celeste, and just
Yeah.
to I looked at your website and saw it, and because for me Celeste really resonated with me
Hmm.
when that came out, and honestly I've played it. I don't say maybe once a year, but I've played it a couple times since it came out, and man, it hits just as hard every single time.
Yeah, Celeste is one of my favorite games of the like ever, and definitely
Mm-hmm.
this past decade. And when I use that game, it's actually that's not. I don't use that one specifically as like a text, but so popular in New York, and it's like starting to pop up all in other places also is an advisory class. Sort of like homeroom was, but it's more than just like attendance. It's like doing social emotional check-ins to see how your students are doing. So I will often use games like Celeste during those periods to just talk about emotions, right? Because a lot of people don't
mhm.
know how to do that. So I use Celeste to talk about having a growth mindset and why it is okay to fail sometimes.
How has the reception been from other teachers? Have you maybe opened their eyes a little bit, or do some of them still think it's I mean, I know maybe since you're not the most traditional school, your teachers already are a little bit more open-minded to different teaching methods, but I remember me and a friend doing like a documentary on video games in like a elective course we took in high school, and I'm also a New York student, so I'm very familiar with the regions. And one
Hmm.
teacher just, being like, "Well, there was," she was like wanting to. We were gonna get people who like him and don't like him to talk about it, and my teacher was like, "I think they're all way too violent, and that it influences kids." So like, there still very much was that mentality when I was going to school. How have the teachers responded?
There's less like pushback. There's still more like not understanding what games are,
Hmm.
but it's not like they're pushing back. It's more you know what you're doing. I mean, you mentioned the nature of my school. The thing is, my school we all make our own curriculum. We don't use textbooks at all, so we're
All
all
right.
doing our own thing. So like we're all kind of trusted that whatever we're making is useful
Okay.
Mhm.
for our student population. But they're at this point, uh, most of the teachers get it right because it's been now a number of years of me doing this, and they're like, oh yeah, the students like can't stop talking about that class of yours. And but in the beginning there was some like, what do you mean you're going to use a game in class? And even that original
Right.
cell for my principal, like I had to show her specifically what I was talking about.
That's okay. So that's good that they've been receptive to it.
Yeah, especially my
Now,
principal. She's been absolutely wonderful about it, and like she even wrote the
Very,
forward in the book that I just published.
very
That's
uh,
awesome.
nice.
Yeah.
speaking of the book, or the books, I should say, it's a those got released fairly recently. I know we kind of
Mhm.
connected when you had that tweet about wanting to come on some podcasts to talk about them. So what uh were those books about? And I guess just pimp your stuff.
Yeah. So this was originally one book that's now technically four.
Oh
There's
wow.
it was the one of my good friends who has a small publishing company around like geek centric stuff. Which is like you
Mm-hmm.
should write a book like 2 years ago, and I was like, okay. So I started writing a book, and it was originally just this one thing, but now there's two teacher versions and two student facing versions that teachers can like handouts and whatnot.
Right.
So the first one is called Teaching with Video Games Strategy Guide, and it's basically your starter guide to like using games in your classroom. It's like the toolkit, like what is all the tech that you need to know, what's all the pedagogy and philosophy that you might need to know,
Mhm.
and then basically a breakdown of 27 different games and activities that you can do in your classrooms across different content areas, like some science, some history, some English language
Mm-hmm.
arts, some social emotional stuff. Not really any math because I don't know math curriculum. That's something I'm working on in the future. I will have some math lessons. I have someone coming to partner on for the first time for Hey Listen Games, which is cool. And
awesome.
if you know the 6-1 Indie folks,
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
right? So Harry Loizides, him and I do a lot of panels together. He's one of the
Okay. Yeah.
writers at 6-1 Indie. So he's a math teacher in Long Island, New York. So he's gonna make some math curriculum for Hey Listen Games, which is great.
Awesome.
Okay.
And so yeah, that book is basically here's 27 different activities that you can just get started now. And then there's a student version of that with handouts for the
Mhm.
27 different activities. Then there's the second book, which is Teaching with Video Games in English Language Arts Unit. And this one is specifically focused on that elective class I was talking about, where we look at video games as literature. Whereas the
Right.
other one is more like you're teaching US history, like here's a game you can bring into your class for 2 days.
Mhm.
Or if you're teaching global history, here's a different game you can bring into your class for 2 days.
Right.
This one was a full 30-day unit that I did with that group of students, specifically looking at Gone Home and What Remains of Edith Finch as like the
Mhm.
two focal texts. And the point of it was to have them. You remember in English class, you have to like learn all the rhetorical devices and literary elements like conflict, point of
Yeah.
view,
Oh yeah.
mood, tone, setting, all that. So it's the same
Right.
skills, same thing that teachers are already doing in that class, but now do it with these two games. So
Mhm.
there's nothing different. It's just the medium that's changed.
Right.
So we spent 30 days dissecting these two games, like playing like 15, 20 minutes at a time rather than just powering through and then having conversations about what's happening in the game.
Mhm.
And it's a full breakdown of that class. I have like student filled out handouts for each one of those lessons. So teachers see like how students responding, my response to it. And then there's also the student facing version of that book with all the handouts for the 30 different days of that class.
How do you
That sounds
guys
awesome.
play the game in the class? Like, do you have a student go like for 10 minutes and then rotate and everybody watches, or does every student have their own console at their desk?
The first one. So
Okay.
I 95% of the time we're playing together as a class with it projected in front of the room. One student's playing,
Mhm.
rotate as needed. Maybe they play for the day and then next day a different student takes over. Or
Right.
if it's like there's a checkpoint and then they can switch at different checkpoints. But they don't play at home. I don't know what tech they have at home. Most of them probably don't have the necessary tech at home. So I'd never expect anyone to have any prerequisites for the class. And then
Right.
the only time I really ever have more than one copy is if it's free and it's like a web browser game. Like
Mhm.
a game I like to use is the Republia Times, um, made by the same guy
Oh,
who
okay.
did Papers, Please and Return of the Obra Dinn. It was one of his first games, and it's just in a web browser.
Hmm.
And it's like you
Right.
manipulate newspaper headlines. It's super fun because it's all about
Huh.
propaganda.
I never heard of
Oh,
that
And that
one.
very cool.
That's
and that's
awesome.
easy because I can just I have a class at a Chromebook, so they can just pull it up on a Chromebook in the web browser.
Right.
And then occasionally I will reach out to a developer and see if I can get some codes and I'll bring them. We have a computer lab. So sometimes I'll put them in groups of like 3 or
Mhm.
5 students in a group. So maybe I'll get like 5 copies of the game, but never
Mhm.
Right.
like 20 to 30 copies of a game or console.
Mhm. And
Nice.
talking about your books, is there anything that either maybe didn't make the cut of the book, or anything you thought of like afterwards, like a 28th step to using video games, anything like that?
Uh, yes and no.
Mhm.
Because there are over like 40 different things that I've done now on Hey Listen Games, the website, but
Right.
it was more I wanted some of them are more difficult. Like you would need to be a gamer. Like I have a lesson on using God of War, and I'm not
Right.
expecting a teacher who doesn't play games to bring in their PlayStation
God of
and
War.
start playing God of War in class. So
Right.
the ones I chose ended up being more friendly, user friendly
Mhm.
for people
Mhm.
who haven't used games before.
Right.
Yeah, like I noticed you had what was that game? Bury Me My Love, which that's a
Yeah,
pretty I mean it's a great story, but gameplay wise it's pretty basic.
exactly.
Mhm.
And it's that is a game that I did in groups once because students have phones,
Mhm.
Right.
right? So or tablets. So that was an easy way to have students work in
Mhm.
groups. That for anyone who
And
doesn't
then
know, Bury Me My Love is all texting. It's just like you're just text
Yeah.
messaging,
Oh, okay.
which is
Cool.
why, and it's about I did it when I was teaching global about refugee crises because it's about the Syrian refugee crisis.
Okay.
And you're just you play as a husband, and you're just following your wife's exploits as she leaves Syria towards Europe, and you're just talking to her the entire game.
Mhm.
So a game like that I would include because like everyone knows how to text.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not like you need to learn all these skills
Yeah.
beforehand.
Especially high
And
schoolers, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, high schoolers they professional texters. Computers they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They can't type. They type with pointers.
Right.
gotta throw them on that Mavis
Um,
beacon like they did for us.
yeah, exactly. Have there been any standout games that have been better received from your class than others?
What Remains of Edith Finch is usually a really popular one. They always in the beginning they're usually a little skeptical because when I bring in games when my students aren't exposed to the class yet, when they think of
Mhm.
games, it's either the popular online games that some of them are playing, or it's
Right.
the kids who don't play games and they just know about either Mario or they know that their friends are shooting other people in games.
Right.
Um, so when I bring in a game like Edith Finch and they're just like, this doesn't look like anything I've played. I've had in 6 years of using that game only one student who had knew what Remains of Edith Finch is.
Wow.
Really?
Oh
Um,
wow.
and it was this year. He came and he's like, this is one of my favorite games. I played it 10 times. It was hilarious.
Dang.
I still
That's
haven't played
awesome.
it, to be honest.
Yeah. So usually there's like some skepticism because they've never seen something like this, and then by the time they get into like the actual story, they're like, oh, this is really cool.
Right.
And then one of my favorites also to teach with is Emily's Away,
Mhm.
Oh.
Oh
the
yeah.
indie game,
Yep.
Right.
which is all about AOL Instant Messenger and just talking through
Mhm.
AOL Instant
Mhm.
Messenger. Because again, like that was texting before texting. It's super easy. They know how to. Anyone who has, even if you haven't played a game, like they can play that because you're just typing, and you're not even real
Mhm.
typing. You just click buttons and it types it out for
Yep.
you.
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
but it was like I did a lesson on dialogue choices and whether or not the dialogue choices were an effective way of telling that story. And
Right.
they love that because it's like everything said in that game is exactly what cringy high schoolers say. It's very real and it
Yep.
connected. Like I got nostalgic from all like the sounds and stuff that the game was making.
Right.
It sounds just like AOL Instant Messenger, and they were
Mhm.
just like, "Mister, I talk like this." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you
Yeah.
talk like that."
Yeah.
It's a little too close
And
to home.
now,
Yeah.
since it's using AIM, have you had to now move it to U.S. history? Has it gone that past? Has it gone to that point yet, where like AIM is part of history?
So um, this year I'm teaching economics and government, and
Yeah.
to start off the year, I usually do something more fun. So I did an entire unit on social media and fake news,
Hmm.
and I
Mhm.
went through the history of social media a little bit, and I did show them AOL Instant Messenger, and some of them, right, they're now born 2000 or later. So some of them have like a vague idea of what that is, but it's not. So like it was included in my history class because they didn't know what it was. Most of them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, I know. They're like, I know typing, but they had never seen or heard the noises.
Right.
Crazy.
Oh yeah. And then I was curious, have you had any developer feedback? You mentioned reaching out to developers for codes. Have you had any um, developers say like this is really cool, like anything along those lines?
Yeah. So I've spoken Kyle Seeley, the developer of the Emily's Away games. I've spoken to a number of times. He loves every time I teach with this game. I tell him how it went. He loves hearing about it.
That's cool.
Um,
That's awesome.
Lucas Pope, I've had one conversation with before about using the Republic Times and Papers, Please, and
Hmm.
he thought it was great. A lot of often when I reach out to developers, they're like, I never thought a teacher would use this game.
Right.
So it's just interesting that like it is becoming more popular now. So I'm hoping that that mindset will start changing because they're creating books,
Uh-huh.
right? Sort of.
Mhm.
So it's just like when an author writes something, they somewhat expect some school somewhere to pick it up. So I do think
Right.
game developers will start thinking that way also.
Hmm.
But Annapurna Interactive has always been they've been great. They've offered codes before, and they've actually they have a good relationship with teachers because their games in particular are usually these like narrative heavy,
Right.
smaller scale games. So a lot of teachers have gravitated towards the ones that they published and developed.
Hmm.
Now, if length wasn't an issue, what is a game that you would want to do like a unit on?
Oh, some Zelda game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, So the namesake of my website, Hey Listen Games, is named after my best friend ever, Navi, helping me out in
Right.
Ocarina of Time as a child. I didn't have a guidebook, so when she yelled, "Hey, listen at me," I needed to listen to her because I didn't know what I was
Right.
doing. Um, but I'm putting because games like that are harder to use because they're much longer. But I am putting together a lesson using some Zelda games, but just like the intro sections
Okay.
of
Right.
them about indirect characterization
Mhm.
because Link never talks. So he can't be
Okay.
characterized through his speech. It has to be like what
Right.
is happening in his surroundings and how people interact with him. So I think what I'm gonna
Ooh.
do is have students play like the intro section of 3 different Zelda games and like have them try and define Link as a character based on
Mhm.
what
That's
they see
cool.
happening across those 3 games.
Right.
That's an interesting way to do
Um,
it.
That's the idea, but I haven't like worked everything
Mhm.
out yet.
No, I like
exactly.
where your head's at though. That's cool.
Yeah.
Mhm. Does the rating of the game ever come into um, consideration when choosing what game to pick? Because everything you just mentioned about Zelda, like you could also use a game like Bioshock with a protagonist that doesn't speak, but a lot
Right.
happening to them, and that game's like rated M, has like some dark subjects. Does that ever stop you from picking certain games?
For me in particular, no, only but I also teach students who tend to be over 18.
Right.
So I do know that there are that will matter for other
Hmm.
teachers depending where they're at. Um, for me, it's more language.
Oh,
So
okay.
like if it's gonna be super text heavy and super dialogue heavy, where it's even like there's a lot of idioms, those are gonna go over my students' heads just because they don't have the
Right.
language yet to
Yeah.
catch on to all of that. Um,
Mhm.
so like I especially love games where like no one talks and it's all visual.
Mhm.
Like I've used Florence, I've used Journey,
Right.
um, a couple of other ones also where it's just like silent and you just like let the story play out.
Mhm.
Uh, but it, it's funny you bring up Bioshock 'cause tons of people keep recommending Bioshock, and
Right.
I'm like maybe one day I will.
Mhm.
'Cause it has the
Well,
same themes as the Fountainhead, doesn't it? The Ayn Rand book.
uh,
I don't know. I haven't read
I've heard
yeah,
that somewhere. I've never read the book either, but I've heard that it's very similar.
it.
right.
Yeah. Do you think that what would change if you were teaching students that weren't from other countries and so they did know the language a little bit better? Like, do you think that there would be significant changes at all?
Not much. I might do some games like what's cool. I think of a game. What did I play recently? I played Control this year, and I'm
Okay.
just thinking about
Mhm.
like all the different documents and like codex entries that you come across your computer, or emails, and it's just like I think it would be cool to do something like that about lore building and world building through like
Right.
stuff like even Last of Us, like all like half the stories in
Oh
that
yeah.
game in those games are just like things that you pick up and read
Yeah.
along the way.
Mhm.
And I
hundred
do think
percent.
it would be cool to do like a unit on world building and how and like stuff that's told to you not through the main narrative, just like stuff like details you pick up on the way.
Yeah.
But that would be way easier to do if the students were all like super familiar with the language.
Yeah,
Right.
because I know that is one criticism of Control is that some people do say if you just kind of mainline it and don't pick any of that stuff up, you don't really get the story
Right.
behind
Mhm.
Control. So yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, yeah.
And
So
then you said you were getting some recommendations of Bioshock. Have you had any other teachers or friends, any colleagues reach out with other recommendations for games?
Yeah, I think I use the Gris or Gree, however you pronounce it.
yeah,
Right.
That's another silent game where
Hmm.
like small, beautiful looking platformer, but that game was recommended to me
Absolutely.
and I did like a lesson on the like 5 stages of grief. Um, with that one, what else was recommended to me? A lot of the ones that end up getting recommended to me, I have already done, which is funny. So
Okay.
it's like it shows like there's a similar headspace of like what people think would be cool text.
Right.
1979 Revolution, Black Friday was recommended to me about the Iranian Revolution,
Interesting.
which I did use in my global class one year, which
Hmm.
was fun. And Bury Me My Love wasn't like personally recommended to me, but I did that lesson based on the experience that I heard from another teacher.
Right.
Okay. How many other teachers are doing this type of thing? And like, have you noticed since you started Hey Listen Games that more are starting to do it?
So it's definitely growing. It is a lot more trying it. Like video games and games in general. So like a lot of tabletop games also is becoming super popular
Okay.
Right.
in classrooms. And I get reached out to a lot, like private messages or emails. Like I tried this lesson, it went really well, which is awesome because like
Mhm.
unless people tell me that they're using my content, I don't really know how
Okay.
much it's
Right.
like being used out there. But I do get a lot of feedback from people who've tried it, and I don't know exactly how one this correlates, but like a lot of PhD candidates, like people in PhD programs are reaching like are who are researching this, like using games in education, have reached out to me for like interviews as a part of their research.
Okay.
So on that end,
Interesting.
there are a lot of people like really starting to look into this at the PhD
Mhm.
level. And
Right.
then I don't know if it's like since Hey Listen Games if it's been substantially more, but it could just be my bubble, my Twitter bubble. Like it seems like a lot more people are talking about it, but that's just
Yeah.
because my Twitter bubble has grown over the
Mhm.
past couple of years. But I do hope that it's becoming a lot more popular.
Have you ever got to speak at a conference about this and the work that you've seen, or has it just been the books?
So I've been on a number of panels at different PAX conventions. PAX South is now gone, but
But
that was
no,
new
no
news.
educational conferences.
So I haven't done educational conferences yet,
Okay.
but I've never tried to
Right.
Gotcha.
because I'm already going to travel a lot. I'd rather go to video game conferences and Comic
That's
Con.
fair.
So
Okay.
like,
Two birds
but
with one stone kind of
I
thing.
did just speak at this most recent New York Comic Con,
Oh,
That's
nice.
awesome.
which is
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, maybe I'll do education now that I have books that I'm trying to sell and
Mhm.
make some money. Maybe I will go to education conferences.
Yeah. Because I know how big those could be. My
Yeah.
aunt is has a PhD in education and actually worked on Long Island for all of her career and just recently
Okay.
retired. So she's talked about all the different conferences she went to and all the research and stuff that she's seen. So I feel
Mhm.
like she's still one of those people that like doesn't get video games, but like I feel like she could be swayed if she saw like data to back it up.
Yeah.
Right.
I might like my Twitter is very split between gamers and teachers, and like
Mhm.
the gamers are always talking about PAX and those cons, and then the teachers are always talking about the things that they go to, and I just like ignore that. So
Yeah, no, they're
maybe, but
definitely a lot more lame.
yes, they don't seem as exciting or as fun. Less
Hmm.
merchandise
Mhm.
to buy and fill up my apartment with.
Yeah, I feel
And you
like
can't
Um,
cosplay at them.
right. I mean, I could.
You c- yeah. Cosplay is your favorite teachers from media, I guess.
Yeah. But like up until these books, I hadn't really been like all everything on the site's free. So I
Mhm.
hadn't been trying to make money per se. I have a Patreon,
Mhm.
but like it's small. Um, so maybe now that I have like a possible income stream, I'll branch out a little bit.
Nice, nice.
well, I know we were talking a little bit before we got started recording, but and so you've been playing some Guardians. What's some other games you've been playing lately?
Ooh, let me pull up my list. So I'm currently playing through Guardians. I'm probably like 30-40% of the way through the game. That is a sleeper hit of this year.
Hmm.
I gotta start it this weekend.
I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm enjoying the story, I should say. The gameplay is like fine, um,
Right.
but the
Agreed.
story and the
Yeah.
banter between the characters, I think, is really great.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But right before this, I played Metroid Dread. Currently, that is my game of the year. I think it was just such a spectacular,
Right.
well-made game. Real difficult,
Mhm.
but I powered through it.
Mhm.
Um, I also I played Kena Bridge of Spirits, which was a nice little wholesome indie game. Not wholesome, it's really sad. It's like really bittersweet, sad
Right.
kind of game. The Artful Escape was pretty cool. That indie
Those are
game that
two
just
I
came
still have to
out.
play. Yeah, it's on Game
Uh,
Pass too, right?
that's where I played it. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
and then not too much. I played Avengers when it was free that like one weekend.
Right.
just just power through
Yeah.
the campaign in one day, like 2
Yeah.
days, just so I can play it for free because I didn't want to pay money for Avengers.
Yep.
That's all you have to play of that
Honestly, yeah.
campaign.
I dropped out after I beat the campaign.
Yeah.
I disagree, man. I like the game. Me and Brett or the Greg Miller of this group are like, yo, we like Avengers.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was just like the campaign was fun.
I
Yeah. I
definitely
agree,
do
yeah.
think the campaign was the strongest part, and the Hawkeye and Black Panther expansions definitely continue that trend of the like this bigger story they're telling is really good, but then it's just like between those big expansions, it is just hallways, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Hallways could be fun if you have like a good team with you.
Yeah, the games as a service is just never that hasn't clicked with me.
Yeah,
Like I just want a campaign start to finish. Let me do it, and like
Mhm.
don't. And I've heard good things about the expansions, but I'm not gonna go back for the Hawkeye and Black Panther.
Yeah.
There are too many other games to play.
fair enough.
Exactly.
Um, I think once I finish up Guardians, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna hate myself and buy the stupid Nintendo online expansion so I could play some N64 games.
Right.
That's
And
my
then
plan as well.
a question I had, how do you juggle it all? How do you juggle being a teacher, writing a book, coming up with these curriculums?
Yeah.
You know, you're married, you have like a relationship as well. You have like a backlog. Like how do you do time management?
So my first year as a teacher, one of my
Mhm.
colleagues I've worked at the same school my entire career, and
Right.
my colleague is also still there, gave me advice: don't take your work home with you. And I know like
Okay.
teachers in particular really struggle with this,
Right.
and I don't take anything home with me if I can't do it in my contracted work hours. I'm just not going to do it.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll work through lunch, and I do often get to school like 45 minutes early to,
Right.
but I'm not like the second my workday ends, I'm going home, and I'm not
Okay.
bringing anything home. So when I'm home, that's time to play games. That's time to work on my personal projects. And the thing with Hey Listen Games is that a lot of the like I do make some curriculum that I don't teach with, but a lot of the curriculum I was making anyway
Right.
for work. So it was like I had to teach myself web development, which took a lot of
Mhm.
time in
Right.
order to make that. Uh, and then the book was super time consuming, but a lot of it was actually based on my blog posts that I had already made for Hey Listen Games,
Okay.
if that makes sense. Because whenever I make a new
Right.
game, I would write up a full rationale for this game, and a lot of those rationales I just took and tweaked for the book because like a lot of I didn't otherwise I'm just repeating myself in a different way.
Right.
Um, so a lot of it is just kind of gotten like lucky in that sense where it's like I've already done a lot of the legwork. Now it's just more
Mhm.
fine tuning and tweaking.
Right.
Um, but my wife also really loves video games, so if I'm playing games, she's
Mhm.
probably playing a different game in the other room or on the couch with her
Exactly.
Switch. And we still have time to do things like we're going out to dinner with my grandparents tonight. We're gonna
Right.
go out tomorrow. I still make sure to take my dog for a whole number of walks each day.
Mhm.
But it's definitely like don't swamp yourself with work at home
Right.
unless you want to do if you want to do it, then I'm not going to stop you from doing it.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I did hit a point at some point where I was like, okay, I'm doing a lot, and I had to like cut back
Right.
a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
like even now, like I have all this stuff, and then I do like some part-time contracted work. So like there's a organization in New York City, the New York Video Game Critics Circle. They run the New
Mhm.
York Video Game Awards each year. Harold Goldberg is the guy who runs it. He's a journalist for the Washington Post, and him and Reggie are hosting the Game Awards
Ooh,
together.
that's
And
cool.
and they're making like a journalism curriculum, like a
Right.
video game journalism curriculum that schools can use. So I'm helping them make that. I'm doing some
Mhm.
contracted work for Epic Games because they've been doing a huge push into education with Unreal
Oh
Engine
wow.
and trying to get teachers to use Unreal Engine. So
Right.
this like winter like has picked back up. I'm now finding myself doing a lot of that work when I come home.
Mhm.
Um, but it's definitely very tiring.
Right.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How have students that aren't gamers responded to your class?
They usually love it after it clicks what I'm doing.
Mhm.
In the beginning of the year, like that first day of school, it's like on their schedule it just says gaming, and then they come to class.
Right.
For the students, like some students choose to be in there, and then sometimes other students will just get placed in because the like administration thinks that it'll be a good fit for whatever skills they need to learn.
Right.
Usually something language related, and they'll be like, "What do you mean? Like, what is gaming? What are we doing?" And
Mhm.
it usually is about like halfway through the first game where it finally clicks. They're like, oh, "Okay, so we're not just like playing for fun."
Right.
Yeah.
But I've never had any pushback from a
Okay.
student like, "Oh, this is dumb or this is stupid. This is wasting my time."
Right.
And what's like when you have a decision-based game in the class, like what's the policy there? Does the class vote? Does the person who's playing get to make the decision?
So it depends. If there's a timer, because sometimes there is like a cooldown,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
then whoever's playing just make the choice because there's not going to be time. If
Mhm.
they're if it's just like up there and you can take as long as you want, I pretty much leave it up to whoever the player is, and usually they'll ask for input, and then sometimes they'll go with what everyone wants, or they'll just do what they want anyway,
Right.
which is fun. When I when COVID originally started and we went into lockdown and went into like just transition schools now on Zoom.
Yeah.
I was like, we were in the middle of that class and like all my curriculum was just thrown out the window. So we had to find something new to do.
Right.
And one of my students mentioned that we should play Batman the Telltale series. And I was just like, all right,
Great
Great
game.
fine,
game.
because I didn't know what to do at
Yeah.
that point. So
Right.
he knows how to stream, or he's now graduated. He knew how to stream.
Mhm.
Um, but with that game in particular, there was like an app companion at the time where like
Yeah.
people could
Oh
vote.
yeah. Yep.
Oh, nice.
So that for the decisions, so that was cool. So I've done it in like different ways over time.
Right.
And I was actually just gonna kind of suggest like, oh, a Telltale game would be kind of interesting, just because if you're
Mhm.
having somebody
Mhm.
different make all the choices every little bit,
Yeah, the
like that's gonna
Telltale
be
one.
interesting
Yeah.
outcomes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I use Batman. I do want to use The Walking Dead at some point. I haven't actually played it
Mhm.
myself, but I always hear how good it is.
Oh
But
yeah.
I've also used Life is Strange
I
before.
was about to mention
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I've not in specifically. I used Life is Strange too. I haven't used any other
Right.
other ones yet.
Okay. What about Until Dawn?
I haven't used Until Dawn, but
Ooh.
that is something that has been brought up before.
Okay, nice.
Right. Interesting.
All right. Well, we're
Do
getting.
you think
Oh, go ahead.
services like Game Pass would make um branch, what catalog of games you can use more accessible because of how cheap it is and then the wide variety of games available?
Yeah, as long as the school doesn't block it, because
Right.
some schools we got all this dumb rules. Um,
Yeah.
Mhm.
like for the first time ever, YouTube's not blocked in my building, and I
Oh
don't know
wow.
why. I think they just like forgot or something. But from when we came back from lockdown. But
Mhm.
I think like Game Pass currently is blocked in like it doesn't work in my school building.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, because they had the cloud version now.
Right.
But Steam
Oh yeah, that's
works.
true.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I do just pull up my Steam account sometimes and just plug in my
Yeah.
Right.
computer.
Mhm.
And
All
And
right.
outside
then
of the
Yeah. Go ahead, Jordan.
Josh, I was just gonna ask, like,
uh
outside of the actual gaming for literature course, what are some of
mhm.
the ways you've incorporated it into the ELA or the history classes?
So when I talk global history, I use Bury Me My Love. When talking about uh, the Syrian refugee crisis, I used 1979 revolution. Black Friday when talking about the Iranian Revolution. Um, recently, I've used in my U.S. history class. I used a game called Never Alone, which I recommend any teacher should look into. Never Alone. It's the small game. It's like only 3 hours long, but
Mhm.
it's what was made by Eline Media. They also made Beyond Blue, the like small like journey esque game.
Right.
And it's Never Alone was made in collaboration with the native Inuit populations of Alaska, and it
Okay.
basically just
Oh,
tells a native Alaskan folklore. Like it's like a myth, basically.
oh,
And
Interesting.
nice.
like embedded through the game are documentary clips like interviewing the people who live there and explaining everything that you're seeing in the game. So it's just really cool,
Right.
especially like we're always and because when I find a game about other cultures. I don't want it to just be like, here's white people's interpretation of the culture we're talking about. So like this
Yeah,
was
of
made
course.
with those people. So that's why it's always high on my recommendation list, especially
Right.
for people who are teaching about like Native Americans, because I know a lot of teachers struggle teaching about Native American history.
Mhm.
And then recently, one of my favorite lessons in U.S. history was a lesson on Super Mario Odyssey, where
Oh,
this one's a
Okay.
big ask for teachers because you need to beat the whole game beforehand. Because you need
Right.
to, like for the lesson to work, you need to be able to level hop.
Mhm.
And I had students go to a couple of the levels, and like each level is based on some part of the world,
yeah.
basically. So
Right.
like Sand Kingdom is based on Oaxaca, Mexico. There's like the French Riviera, and like there's different areas. So I basically had them browse through a couple of levels and
Mhm.
just talk about like, is this okay? Is this how are they portraying these cultures? Are they doing it in a good
Right.
way? Are they kind of stereotyping? So it's just like based on like I was just kind of getting them to have these class-wide conversations based on how some of their own cultures, 'cause I do teach a number of Mexican students, right, how they see their culture being represented in the game. And some
Right.
students were like, this is awesome. I love seeing Mario run around in these areas. And some other ones were like, okay, but we don't all wear sombreros and ponchos. So it was
Right.
cool to see them
Yeah.
talk
Mhm.
about this and using
That's
Mario because
amazing.
they all know Mario, every single
That's
Right.
one of
true.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I didn't even
Yeah.
consider that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Mhm.
was a fun one to do.
I can imagine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know one game that just kind of popped into my head. I think it's what's it? Her Story. That's like kind of like the
I used
AMV.
it
Like,
once. Yeah, yeah.
oh, cool, cool.
It was like 3 years ago though that I used it.
Hmm.
When I did a lesson like nonlinear storytelling.
Right.
Hmm.
And how like the story of Her Story is like all out of order, and you're just
Mhm.
trying to piece together what happened. Um,
Right.
I also did nonlinear storytelling using Tacoma, which was
Okay.
the follow up to Gone Home,
Right.
Yep.
made by Fulbright, that company.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Because in that game, it's cool. It's like the story. It's like all these digital holograms, and you basically, in whatever order you want, follow different people's stories, and then you get the whole narrative by the end of it.
Right.
And it's stuff like that. Like you can only do that in video games.
That's true.
That's why I like
Hmm.
using games so much. Like even a game like Edith Finch, all the different stories that happen in the game, you can't do that in a movie. It doesn't work the same way.
Exactly.
You get
And
all these
is
really
that
cool, unique experiences.
Definitely.
exactly? Is that kind of why you lean more towards using video games as your literature review?
Yeah, partly, and then partly because at least in my school, I'm the only one that's going to do it.
Right.
Like there other teachers are using movies and documentaries and comics and graphic novels already.
Mhm.
But not a lot of them are really familiar with games. So
Yeah.
Right.
I'm gonna be like if someone's gonna do it, it's gonna be me in my school.
Mhm.
I did have a teacher in high school that actually taught through movies, and it was, the parents would be like, "Oh, is he just showing you movies?" But there was always discussions afterwards. It was he taught both psych and soc, and
Mhm.
so I just think that like because we can accept that you can do that learning with movies, it's just video games are just the next step of being like this should be
Yep.
acceptable.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, he
Okay.
actually showed
Well,
us
Do you
Mean
ever
Girls.
really?
It's
He
it's a
said
classic.
no, he said this movie is the sociology look at the social hierarchy of high school, and that was our first unit.
That's
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
makes
Sorry, Alex, I
sense.
cut you off.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say we're getting a little short on time, so I know we kind of wrap these up with asking. And you already said what your game of the year is right now, which is Metroid Dread. So,
Mhm.
what's a game coming out in the next, let's say, 6-ish months that you're looking forward to?
What games are coming out? The next big one is probably Horizon Forbidden West was confirmed for February,
Yeah,
Yep.
just like every other game.
Yeah.
like all the other
Oh,
ones. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, that's probably the next like big one that I'm looking
Mhm.
forward to.
Mhm.
There's probably some indie game that I'm forgetting because I always look forward to indie games that are coming out also.
Yeah, a little indie game like Halo.
Does Nintendo have anything in the pipeline?
Pokemon.
Okay, so
Um,
I'm like potentially super excited for Arceus. I don't know. Like, I'm very skeptical of what that game is
Mhm.
going to end up being, but I like that
Mhm.
they're doing something different.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Agreed.
I am excited for it, but like cautious optimism.
Good first step.
Yeah.
Kind of like how X and Y were. Like it's a good first step to 3D. That's kind of like what
Hmm.
Arceus is probably going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Alrighty. Any last questions before we head out, Jordan or Josh?
No.
Yeah, I think I got all mine out.
Yeah.
All
Same.
right, Zach. Zach, thank you so much for joining us. One last time, let people know where they can find you.
So on easiest way to find me, follow me is on Twitter. I'm at Hey Listen Games. I have an email in my bio if you prefer email. There's also my website, heylistengames.org. There's also a contact form on there. It'll shoot me an email directly if you want to do that. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/heylistengames. Um, all my stuff's free regardless, but if you want to like give me $1 a month, that's nice. But my stuff's always free because teachers don't make a lot of money. So I want to make sure that I'm not charging teachers for anything unless they want to donate some money. So you can
Right.
support me there. And then, yeah, if you're interested in my books, just go on Amazon and look up Teaching with Video Games, and both books should pop up.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's great work. It's
Yeah.
awesome that it's a trend that's starting to catch on. So
Yeah.
look forward to seeing where it's going to go next. Thank you all so much for joining us. Remember to like this video, comment, and subscribe. We'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.